My name is Dennis Cooley. I am the director of the Northern Plains Ethics Institute at NDSU. What we do is host Science Religion Lunch Seminar. The Science Religion Lunch Seminar was created a number of years ago in order to bring in the best sort of thinking about science, religion, or lunch, or a combination of these. And so I will introduce our speaker in a moment. I do want to just note that October 5th is the next ones. We usually do these every 2 weeks. It will be a discussion of the essence of yoga. It will be in person and online in Zoom, and this material will be sent out later. And it is, and I'm going to kill this, the Swami's name, Swami Tatwamayanda. And if somebody could say that better than I can, I'm more than happy for you to do so. He's going to be talking about yoga is the art and science of attaining spiritual common sense by a popular understanding of our mind, our thoughts, tendencies, and emotions. So that's coming on the 5th of October. And other ones you can see on our schedule at NDSU, NPEI, and so on. But I want to now introduce today's speaker, who's going to be talking about surrogate evolution, what we waste with material culture. Ganapathy Mahalingam, Ph.D. is professor of department in the Department of Architecture, School of Design, Architecture, and Art. An architect by education training, Ganapathy completed an undergraduate professional education in architecture at the School of Architecture and Planning in Chennai, India, and became a registered architect in 1984. He came to the United States in 1985 to pursue a master's degree in architecture, which he earned at Iowa State University in 1986. He has taught a huge number of areas, eventually coming to North Dakota University. In fact, it says currently educating future generations of architects at North Dakota State University. What's really interesting, Ganapathy combines together philosophy, architectural design, computational modeling, poetry, music, and art, and culinary delights, travel. He has an inclusive, diverse way of thinking about things. I think that you'll enjoy immensely.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that kind introduction, Dennis. And thank you for the opportunity to make this presentation today. I'm grateful to the Northern Plains Ethics Institute and the Science Religion Lunch Seminar Series. What I'd like to present today is something that I think is profound and that we should all be concerned with. It's a set of thought-provoking ideas and some questions that maybe will stimulate a fruitful discussion at the end. The title of my presentation is Surrogate Evolution, What We Waste with Material Culture. And through the ideas I present, I'll try to articulate what this means and what it implies for us. So I want to take you to the turn of the 20th century, around 1907, when there emerged a debate about what the life force was that animated inanimate matter. So there were significant advances in physics at this time, and there was a growing belief that physics could explain chemistry, chemistry could explain biology, biology could explain psychology, and eventually consciousness. So there was a strong development, intellectual development, and a set of advances in physics at this time. But a number of people were growing dissatisfied with this study of matter, and they wanted to focus on the life force. The biological organism was considered matter, but there seemed to be some life force animating that matter. There was the breathing, there was the blood circulation, there was the digestion and metabolism, there was the homeostasis and regulation of body temperature. So some life force seemed to animate this matter. And the French philosopher and Nobel laureate Henri Bergson at this time in 1907, wrote a book called Creative Evolution, where he introduced the concept of the elan vital, the vital force or vital impetus, that was actually flowing through matter or coursing through matter. He used that in the old English sense of blood coursing through your veins. So this life force was coursing through matter and was trying to exert pressure and obtain from matter what it could. So Bergson did not get to articulate very well what this elan vital was trying to obtain from the inanimate matter. So it would have been a very interesting debate if he had articulated that further and talked about what it is that the elan vital was trying to obtain from inanimate matter. So he started to present what was called orthogenesis, that is a direction for the unfolding of life. So in physics, the second law of thermodynamics had been established, and entropy was believed to be increasing. There were initial ideas about an expanding universe, and then the concept of time's arrow came into the debate. So people were talking about a direction for the unfolding of life, along with these development in physics with time's arrow and the second law of thermodynamics. They were trying to extend that into the biological realm, but it was still very fuzzy and unclear at this time. At about this time, evolution and the concepts of evolution were taking hold. And evolution was postulated as the advancement of a biological species. And a biological species advances first and foremost by surviving, and then by continually adapting to its environment. So the phrase survival of the fittest captured this concept of advancement. However, this fitness was not a fitness for a particular aspect of performance, and it was not expressed in teleological terms in the classical sense of Aristotle. So even though they used the phrase survival of the fittest, this fitness was something else. And even today, when the people who study genetics talk about it, it's more like a survival statistic than the fitness for a particular aspect of performance. So this was postulated as the purpose of evolution, the advancement of the biological species, especially humans. Then what was the role of material culture in this evolution? Initially, material culture evolved to help the biological species advance or evolve. And early elements of material culture involved shelter, clothing, and weapons to hunt food, all of which had a direct bearing on the advancement of the biological species in terms of survival. Now, material culture has evolved to provide a vast storehouse of inanimate matter on which a limited resource of energy are applied to advance the human spirit. That's what material culture has grown into from those initial beginnings in terms of helping the biological species survive and advance in evolutionary terms. So with this initial beginning, if you look at material culture now, it has deteriorated into a medium for economic activity, which is far removed from biological evolution. So the economics project, where you have a vast resource of inanimate matter and limited amounts of energy to continuously produce goods and services, is predicated on this material culture being a medium of economic activity. So how is this material culture directed? It's directed by the word, which is the language of the, or words, which is the language of the human spirit. Words and not the needs of a biological species are now driving material culture. The words are part of a language system and they are the source of agency. And we have started to function in this lexicality of matter. So words manipulate matter, and this lexicality is the realm in which we function and evolve. So the link between the evolution of a biological species and a material culture driven by words has become so tenuous that it has become almost disconnected. So in religion, it's well understood the concept of the word or logos becoming flesh. The Gospel of John, one of my favorite Gospels, introduces this concept. Now, did human beings take this idea that's in the Gospel of John and transpose it to the realm of matter so that words became various forms of matter? So if you take the word realizing and you separate the word real in that word, when you're realizing a word, that is, you're making the word real in terms of letting it direct the transformation of matter, then is that different from realizing the logos in the flesh that the Gospel of John talks about? So instead of words becoming flesh, did words just end up becoming matter for manipulation? And now manipulation for economic activity. So what is surrogate evolution? Surrogate evolution is the substitution of the evolution of humans as a biological species by the transformations of a material culture. So the biological species is now considered to advance when a material culture involving inanimate matter is being transformed. That is the realm in which it's said to advance. This can be a dangerous and false assumption that can stunt our growth as a biological species. So biological evolution or dialectical materialism. What helps us advance as human beings? Do we advance when we advance as a biological species, or do we advance by transforming material, inanimate matter, with limited amounts of energy? So dialectical materialism seems to suggest the latter, where we advance by continuously transforming the concrete things around us, including factors of production and social classes and systems, but it doesn't take into account the advancement of the biological species. What are the limits of either of these pursuits? What is our true purpose? Did we take a detour by engaging in dialectical materialism? Can we get back to a true path of evolving as a biological species before we reach a point of no return? The question at the end is, there are cultures who are not based primarily on a material culture that are long focused on the evolution of humans as a biological species and biological transformation. Should we now revisit those cultures and what they offer and abandon a focus on material culture in as much as it does not advance humans as a biological species? That's the question I'd like to leave you with and say, are we engaged in surrogate evolution instead of the evolution of the biological species? Have we transposed our evolution into the realm of material culture? Are we endlessly manipulating inanimate matter using a limited resource of energy instead of focusing on the development of the biological species? Could we evolve to maybe levitate or maybe even fly? How did the birds evolve from the dinosaurs and were able to fly? So all of these kinds of things that are part of the realm of evolutionary biology will come into play when we talk about surrogate evolution. If we just manipulate inanimate matter with limited resource of energy, and we do that endlessly, and it can be a profitable economic activity, are we furthering ourselves as a biological species? Where are we going? What is our true purpose? And if you look at fitness, and the fitness in genetics does not consider fitness as an aspect of performance. You don't have special abilities in mental thinking or the evolution of the brain being inherited as a trait. That particular person who developed the advanced mental skills, if they don't procreate, they don't have any offspring, then they're not fit at all. So you may be an Einstein and come up with the E=mc² equation, but if you don't have any children, you're absolutely not fit at all in terms of evolutionary biology. Whereas if you have limited or modest mental abilities and you have 12 children, you're going to be one of the fittest aspects of the human species in terms of what survives. So all of these things, are we not focusing on the biological species and biological transformation? I talked about other cultures. Cultures such as the yogic culture in India literally took to heart realizing the logos in the flesh, because the system of meditation with mantras, sound and vibration, worked directly to transform the biological organism. And this is being now borne out with a lot of scientific research, that the sound and the vibration, what was considered primal and part of the logos, was actually used to transform the biological organism in these yogic practices. So are we missing out on something when we neglect that kind of what some spiritual leaders are calling inner engineering for this outer engineering of inanimate matter with limited resources of energy? So are we missing out as a species, as biological organisms, in terms of where we could go and how we could evolve by transferring our evolution to this surrogate evolution in material culture? So with that, I'll pause and I'll let questions direct the conversation, and I have more material to add as and when questions come up.
So we have two ways of asking questions. It's relatively informal. So we have questions you can type into the chat, or you can raise hand. I think that'll work too. When you were talking, Ganapathy, when you're talking about the purpose of evolution, I was thinking a different way. And so how about this? If we think that the world doesn't have purpose, we reject Aristotle and all of that functionality and everything having a particular purpose because it exists. Evolution just exists. It's a way of things changing, not for advancement, but just change. And so it made me, what you were saying about words and how they're used, I think a lot of times when human beings talk about the universe and the natural functions and so on, we tend to anthropomorphize them. I heard one physicist one time talking about how the sun wants to do this or that. And I said, really, when did the sun develop a consciousness? It doesn't want to do anything. It just is. And it has these effects. So if I'm coming in that way, how does that affect the notion of material culture and the surrogate culture? Because would it make it more a human problem? That is, we're the ones creating this, okay, and we could stop creating if we redo our language?
Okay, let me present a scenario. Let's say you put forth the word chair. You don't even say chair, you say something to sit upon. You put forth the word, something to sit upon, or even call it a chair. And then you start working with wood and other materials and you make the chair. So now you have a component of material culture that began with an agency in words. So we create TikTok videos. We create USB flash drives. We create computer monitors. We create cars. We create spacecraft. So from the word, the material is affected where the words form the agency. And my question is, have we let ourselves start getting so wrapped up in the lexicality? Lexicality is different from logos. So are we losing ourselves in the lexicality and the agency of words? And are we just mindlessly manipulating inanimate matter with limited resource of energy and calling that evolution? See, a human being from a culture that's materially advanced is considered superior to a human being from a culture that's less materially advanced in terms of this transformation of inanimate matter with limited resource of energy. So when words form the agency, the primal agency to manipulate matter, and you consider the transformation of matter as progress or evolution or advancement, rather than the biological organisms. Let's say, for instance, like you have in some cultures, you could utter a word and that could transform your biological organism. This is the concept of the mantra in yogic meditation and practice. So you could utter a word and that could transform your biological organism. Would you do that, or would you utter a word and manipulate matter to make a chair or a TikTok video or a Facebook post? Yeah. So what would you use your words for? For the evolution of the biological organism, or for the transformation of inanimate matter with limited resources of energy?
Well, I think it would be a difficult one because each time we speak, because we are a biological species, and I think we're natural, we transform our universe by each word because we're characterizing in a certain way, and all that is real. So I'm more Kantian about this than maybe I should be with the phenomenology. That's really what is that we deal with. But I wanted to give Pastor Ron, are you ready?
My main I look at this a little bit like, okay, we have the physical, and our material culture focuses on that physical stuff. And meanwhile, we have kind of this emotional and spiritual realms, or things that we can also see advancement in. How do we, when you're talking about words and like speaking to your inner self, there's certainly a physical component there, but how would you kind of explain the emotional and spiritual components of those as well?
So that's why when I talked about material culture, I said it has evolved to be a medium for the expression of the human spirit. And the human spirit is comprised of all the things you talk about, your thoughts, your emotions, and your feelings, and things like that. So in that sense, if you're using material culture to express your spirit in the sense of that, composite structure of your feelings, thoughts, emotions, and your mental self, then you're giving an aspect of your organism, and you can argue this as a scientist, whether your mental world is an epiphenomenon of your physical organism. So you get into all those kinds of arguments. but you are in a way, when you make the material culture an expression of that, you're still pushing or surrogating the evolution to the material realm. How are you transforming yourself as a biological organism when you use the words?
Go ahead.
Okay. Now, what we're seeing is kind of a reality of the physical and a reality of that which is other than physical. They have to tie together. And I think the big problem is, how do we do it?
Yeah, that was the classic problem that René Descartes faced when he first proposed the dualism. And there was always the problem of how the mental world interacted with the physical or material world. That's been there from the foundation of dualism with René Descartes, the mechanism by which the realm of the logos interacts with the realm of the flesh. And I think in some cultures, ancient cultures like in India, they were beginning to develop the technology, if you want to call it that, where they were aware of and cultivating the power of the logos in transforming the flesh. They were using these sound and vibration patterns to actually transform their biological organisms. So now, how do we let words mediate our development as biological organisms? Very complicated ways, not direct, using a lot of associations, using lots of substitutes, all kinds of mechanisms. So how do we do that? Using words in the conventional sense of lexicality. How does lexicality help us, evolve or grow as biological organisms? Forget the logos, too complicated, too loaded. Just ask yourself, how can lexicality help us evolve as biological organisms?
Do we have other questions, or Ganapathy, do you want to continue on?
Yeah, I want to talk about some of these things because why is this important? I come to this as a person who's trained in the discipline of architecture. In architecture, if you ask a professional architect what are the three most things they are concerned with when they're designing buildings, is they'll say officially it's health, safety, and welfare. Those are the three things that we concern ourselves with when we design a building or a work of architecture. And health is a very important component there. The inhabitants have to be in the best possible conditions for health in the buildings that are built. So now that's just keeping it like your body temperature at a level of homeostasis. Do we ask, can architecture help you evolve as a biological organism? Can it take you to the next level? Can architecture and the physical environment that you create, can it take you to that next level as a biological organism? Is there a next level? So philosophers would just jump in and say, maybe there's no next level, and we just endlessly participate in what the genetics folks call genetic drift. So we're just drifting about, our alleles keep changing in proportion. We keep drifting about for thousands, millions of years. Maybe there's no next level, maybe there's no higher level. So what is the value of Aristotle and his concept of the telos? And what is the level of value we place on saying you are created in the image of the divine? So do we aspire to become one with the divine, as some traditions would have you believe? So it's all these things about, if there's no next level of this, if fitness is just statistics of survival and just genetic drift happens all the time, maybe we're okay with this surrogate evolution where we just manipulate matter endlessly into goods and services. But we're running out of energy, useful energy. So that's going to be a problem soon. So soon meaning beyond our lifetime in hundreds of thousands of years. But those are the kinds of things that we need to ponder with this concept of surrogate evolution.
Could I ask a question?
Yes,
Here?
go ahead.
The way that I think about it is it could be a combination of a telos, but a telos that's assigned by people. So what am I talking about? I think what's unique about human beings is that all other species deal with what we call the is. This is what is the case. So human beings can only understand what is the case, but what ought to be. They have a creative imagination, which I think ties in nicely with your architecture, what architecture does. Because architecture by its very nature is creative. It's taking what is the case and turning it into something that didn't exist before. So I see that as a way of thinking about evolution. So evolution can just run its course without us. We didn't need to be here. But the evolution that we should be thinking about is one in which we're trying to achieve an ought. This is what we ought to be. This is how our environment and all the rest ought to be. And then you've got the human creativity and critical reasoning engaged in it. How far off am I from you with that?
Yeah, I mean, those are the ground, that's the ground of ethics. You know, my question is, are we dealing with this in the proper way by using lexicality and letting it operate on inanimate matter with limited resources of energy? Yeah. That is what I'm questioning. Is surrogate evolution, can we transfer it to a surrogate evolution and be happy?
So would it be fair to say, instead of focusing our energies on, let's take a current topic and say, creating vaccines, instead talking to our bodies and the immune system that is within them to evolve?
It's not an either or proposition. This is not being presented as an either or proposition. You do need to do things that help your biological organism in other ways, like the vaccine prevents your biological organism from dying, for instance, and things like that. So it's not an either or proposition. What you do in addition to all these things that you do to help your evolution as a biological organisms, you still do all the things that you did before for survival. You still engage in the production of food. You still engage in the creation of shelter. You still engage in the creation of social networks. You do all of those things. But you also start to focus on how you consciously transform your biological organism. So it's not an either or proposition. You don't give up this or that. We don't have to make false choices when we do this.
Are there other questions before we let Ganapathy move to his next subject if he wants to do so?
No, I would like the conversations are going well. I think the questions are fueling more things that I have to say. So that's good.
It looks like Jennifer Brandel would like to talk. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. Do you think that, so we have this big technological influence on us that changes us, I think maybe in ways we don't quite understand fully yet, but do you see that as something that's related to a material change or an immaterial influence on our biology?
What I want to bring your attention to, Jennifer, with this concept is that we have not studied technology for its effect on the biological organisms in significant ways. Like, for instance, architects have not really studied in depth how the built environment transforms the biological organisms. They've concentrated on the superficials of homeostasis, like providing optimal temperatures or humidity levels and light levels and things like that. they've not studied in depth how an architecture transforms a biological organism in depth. Big realm of research available for people now and into the future. So that's the problem with using lexicality to drive technology. Proliferation of things. I can name hundreds of things we deal with every day that are just words as agencies acting on matter using limited resources of energy. And we're all considering ourselves to be advancing when we do that, which is what I'd like to question. Are we really advancing when we do all of those things? Play TikTok videos and things like that. So
yeah, I question that as well. Thanks.
This is making me think of the discussion we had last semester about the purpose of architecture. So you mentioned the three things it's supposed to do, but if you recall, I talked about architecture as communication, that it's a way of the architect communicating with the people who are experiencing what was created. And so that would be words, or not maybe words as words that I'm using right now, but it would influence how people's health is. And I agree with you on all three of those things. But what do you think about the notion that architecture is a way of communicating, but a way of communicating in a way that creates a reality that people live in? And then, of course, that reality will affect who they are and how they interact with their environment.
Right. So words as communication is just one aspect of words as agency. So words as the source of agency is where the genesis happens. So words as sources of agency are the more critical thing to look at rather than words as communication. Words as communication become critical when the communication instigates or sets off an agency or an action. Then the words of communication become critical as well. So that's what we are driven by. We're driven by this enormous lexicality, and we are nowhere near touching the logos in many instances as driving us. So even if you're a true believer and you believe in the scriptures and everything and try to stay true to it, in practice, you don't. You're driven by this lexicality and you're hopelessly lost in touch with the logos.
As we're talking about change, evolution, whatever, we're talking about a direction of movement. And with the direction of movement, and of course, we can't see the future. The impossible question is, where are we going?
Right. So we have entrusted where we are going to the manipulation of matter with limited resources of energy. We have done that consciously. So the question now that is before us is that where we should be going goes back to what Dennis was saying. As human beings, we have a unique sense of ethics and what ought to be done. One of the few species that has that, and that's what we are faced with now with this. My purpose in making this presentation was to make you aware that we are engaging in this surrogate evolution and what we should do about it.
If everyone can hear you, this is there a question we should be asking here? Have we missed something, Ganapathy?
I don't think so. The only thing I'd like to bring your attention again to some ancient cultures that have been, doing this, and it has become an unfortunate byproduct of this surrogate evolution to think people who are not advanced in terms of material culture are somehow inferior, an inferior form of the species or an inferior aspect of the species, simply because they don't have this, in French, what they call accoutrement, the accompaniments, the material accompaniments. So a villager in India may be a much more evolved biological organism than a suburban middle-class American living in really, comfortable conditions with all the material comforts. So how do we take into account how we treat others with this concept of surrogate evolution? It actually directs our action, our attitudes in how we treat other people. So if you look at some of these natives in, say, maybe the islands of Andaman and Nicobar that haven't been touched by civilization for hundreds of thousands of years, maybe, we say those are savages. Who knows? They may be holding a biological, profile that may outlast us. So, and here we are happy with our surrogate evolution.
I think that's a huge point you just made about how each community or each society or culture thinks it's the center of value, that it has found the truth and that everyone else fails to measure up to them. In fact, we were just talking about it yesterday in my contemporary moral issues class. And I said, you have cultures out of Africa that were the first cultures. They've been around a huge amount of time. And so there's the notion of missionaries. And I know Pastor Ron was a missionary at one time, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But so missionary culture coming into a very old culture, you've got a clash on each one. It has values they think are the right values. And so which ones are the right ones? You're talking about developed versus developing world, where developed is considered to be superior to the developing world, even though as a species, it probably would be better for us not to have the stuff that we've got, including probably Zoom.
Right. So the sad part is the superiority is felt as a species, which is the sad part.
And I also think it's destructive. So what I'm hearing you say is going to something that is more sustainable as a biological species in an environment makes a lot better sense than trying to form an artificial one in which it's materialism and consumerism.
In the 70s, when we had the oil crisis, there was a beautiful book written by E.F. Schumacher. It's called Small is Beautiful, Economics as if People Mattered. That was the subtitle. It was all about a kind of downsizing, if you will, that reflected us as biological organisms in social creatures, and much smaller material footprint, much smaller energy footprint. He was arguing for small is beautiful in the economic realm. So a lot of us growing up in developing countries had to deal with texts such as those because it was an urgent need for the country to be able to do a lot of things with limited material resources. So it became very critical for us to engage in thinking such as small is beautiful and downsizing your material footprint, downsizing your energy footprint. That's the sad part. The yogis of ancient India may have developed a direct link from the logos to the biological organism, and we haven't even bothered to consider it. Forget establishing beyond a reasonable doubt and all of that. So we haven't even considered those as inner engineering technologies. It's beginning to happen now, though. Whether we like it or not, we have relegated ourselves to a surrogate evolution. And it's a profound concern, and we need to think about it seriously and see where it's taking us as a biological organism, as a social creature, as someone moving towards the divine, all of those different aspects. Where is it taking us? We have relegated it for sure to the surrogate evolution. The question is, where is it taking us? And that's what we have to ponder.
And I think that's an important place to stop. Thank you very much for coming and talking with us today. I just want to remind folks about, there's one coming up on October 5th. And we, of course, will invite you, if you are not on our emailing list, please send an email or to the, I'll try this again because I know what the email address is. It's ndsu.npei@ndsu.edu. So there's a lot of NDSUs in that one. And just say that you want to be on the Science Religion Lunch Seminar, or if you would like to present. Of course, we are always interested in that. I know Pastor Ron has presented in the past and he hasn't volunteered to do it recently. So maybe in spring 2022 or one of the other folks here, just shoot us an email to that address and we will be very happy. Thanks again, Ganapathy, and everyone have a wonderful day. I will see you in October 5th.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.